They called her the Widow of Dead Horse Ridge. Some said she'd gone mad after the fire. Others whispered she was cursed. But none dared come close to Clara Elwood's ranch, not in 17 long years. Until this morning. Through the lavender mist of dawn, Clara saw it, a child's silhouette staggering across the frostbitten field. A girl no more than 9, barefoot, bleeding dress torn at the sleeves. The wooden gate groaned as she clung to it, then gave way. She collapsed beside the old water trough, her little hands shaking as she tried to drink. Clara didn't move. From inside the cabin, behind the cracked window pane and the silence thick as snow, Clara watched. Her breath caught when she saw the bruise on the girl's face. The blood smeared on her leg. But what stopped Clara wasn't the injuries. It was the eyes, wide, terrified, and far too knowing for a child that age. Eyes that had seen something no one should ever see. Clara had seen that look once on her own face 17 years ago in the mirror after the fire. She reached for the door but stopped. She had rules. One rule really: keep the world out. Stay forgotten. No more broken things. But then the girl looked up straight at her. Their eyes met through the fog. And with a cracked whisper, the child said, "They killed my mama. And now, they're coming for me." A sound reached Clara's ears, soft but unmistakable. Hoofbeats, distant, deliberate, drawing closer. The girl tried to rise, stumbled, then crawled toward the porch. Clara's hand shook as it hovered over the doorknob. For 17 years, she'd let the world believe she was dead. But something deeper than fear stirred in her chest. Something ancient. Something maternal. Something ready to rise. And by the time the girl's small fist tapped once, twice on Clara's wooden door, Clara Elwood had already picked up the rifle she swore she'd never touch again. Clara Elwood hadn't heard her name spoken aloud in nearly 2 decades. Out here, names didn't mean much, memories even less. After the fire, she'd let it all burn: her house, her past, her place in town. The people of Dry Creek Hollow had sealed her fate the day they stood in the rain and watched the ashes smolder. No one helped. No one asked why her baby girl hadn't made it out. They only stared, and when Clara screamed for answers, for justice, they answered with silence. Then came the rumors. They said Clara was drunk that night, that she lit the fire herself, that her mind was never right since the war, that maybe, just maybe, she wanted to be rid of her family. The more absurd the gossip, the quicker it spread. No one believed the truth that someone had broken in, that it wasn't just flames that took her husband and child. But truth was expensive in Dry Creek, and Judson Pike, the banker, had already paid for his version. Clara left the town that very night, broken, blackened. She wandered until the pain numbed, then built a shack on the side of Dead Horse Ridge where the wind howled like it remembered everything. There she lived with ghosts, her husband's voice in the rustle of the trees, her daughter's laugh in the creek water. And her hands hadn't touched a weapon since. Once they'd been the steadiest in her regiment. A Civil War field nurse turned sharpshooter, Clara had learned to load a rifle with a calmness that terrified even the men. She had stitched wounds in the mud of Tennessee, delivered babies in abandoned barns, held the dying through nights no God should have watched. But none of that mattered when she came home. Not to Dry Creek. They didn't want a soldier. They wanted a housewife. And when she didn't fit the picture, they tore it apart. Now, 17 years later, that part of her, the fire, the skill, the rage, was buried deep. She'd lived like a shadow, spoken to no one, grown her food, fixed her roof, learned to be invisible, until this morning. Until a child, bruised and broken, fell at her gate with eyes full of terror and a voice full of grief. They killed my mama. Clara stared at the girl curled up by the hearth, now asleep beneath an old quilt. Her name was Rosie, and she'd run nearly 10 miles barefoot through frost and dust. Her lips were cracked, her hands raw. But she was breathing. Still breathing. The tea kettle whistled. Clara didn't move. Instead, she sat in her husband's old chair, staring at the fire, feeling something inside her ache. Not grief, she'd worn that threadbare. Not fear, she'd lived with that like an old dog at the foot of the bed. No, this was something else. The sound of hoofbeats still echoed in her ears, not just from this morning, but from 17 years ago. That night. The night she heard them just before the fire roared to life. The night the window shattered, and her husband screamed her name. They killed my mama. Rosie's words unlocked something Clara had long buried. And when she looked over at the child, dirty-faced knotted hair curled tight like a frightened foal, Clara didn't see just a stranger. She saw Emma, her daughter, the one the town had let die. And for the first time in 17 years, Clara Elwood whispered aloud to herself, broken hoarse and full of fire, "Not again." The sun had barely crested over the hills when Clara heard it again, hoofbeats. This time they weren't echoes from memory. They were real, rhythmic, deliberate. The sound of men who rode not for travel, but for purpose. Rosie stirred in her sleep beside the hearth, her tiny frame barely visible beneath Clara's thick old quilt. She hadn't said much after those first trembling words, just her name, her age, and that her mother was gone. She drifted off with the exhaustion of someone who had run not just from danger, but from the world itself. Clara stepped out onto the porch. The morning air bit through her shawl. From the ridge she could see them, 4 riders, moving up the old logging trail that twisted like a scar toward her land. Their silhouettes dark against the pale sky. One had a wide-brimmed hat with silver conchos that caught the sun. Another slouched like he was drunk or used to being feared. Clara's gut twisted. These weren't locals. They were collectors, the kind Pike sent when words failed. And Pike didn't like to repeat himself. She stepped back inside, bolted the door, and crossed to Rosie. "Wake up, sweetheart," Clara said gently but firmly. "Now." Rosie's eyes fluttered open, dazed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Did I?" "No time," Clara cut in, kneeling. "There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen. Crawl inside. Don't come out until I say." The girl's eyes widened, but no buts, Clara said. "You stay quiet. No matter what you hear, promise me." Rosie hesitated, then nodded. Clara pulled back the rug and pried up the trap door. It creaked like everything old and weathered, but it opened. The space was tight and dark, lined with jars and dust and the scent of earth. Clara helped her climb in, wrapped her in another wool blanket, and touched her cheek. "You're safe now," she whispered. She shut the trap door just as the sound of horses stopped. Silence fell, the kind of silence that carried weight. Then a knock, not timid, not polite, just 2 thuds against the frame. Clara lifted the rifle from its resting place above the hearth. She hadn't held it in 17 years, but it still felt familiar. Balanced, cold, steady. She opened the door just enough to meet the eyes of the man outside. He was tall, with a beard like tangled rope and a scar that split his cheek in 2. His voice was slick with false courtesy. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "We're looking for a runaway girl. About so high. Dark hair. Might be scared, might be hurt." Clara said nothing. "She stole something," he added, smiling without warmth. "From a banker in Dry Creek. Real serious offense." Clara leaned on the doorframe, rifle visible now. "Bankers don't send men like you for stolen bread," she said flatly. The man's smile faded. Another rider stepped forward, a younger man with dark eyes and a nervous twitch. He glanced at the house like he half expected bullets to fly. Pike said, "Check everywhere." The younger one muttered. "Pike don't give orders on my land," Clara said. That got their attention. The leader's eyes narrowed. "Clara Elwood," he said slow. "Ain't you supposed to be dead?" Clara didn't blink, still thinking about it. The third rider chuckled. The fourth said nothing, just adjusted the gun on his hip. "You seen a girl or not?" the leader asked, stepping closer. Clara stepped onto the porch, letting the door creak close behind her. Her boots hit the wood with finality. "If I had," she said, "I'd have given her water. Maybe bandaged her wrist. I reckon I'd have fed her too." 'Cause she looked half-starved. A long pause. Then the younger man said, "So, she's here." Clara raised the rifle a fraction. "Just enough." I didn't say that she replied. "But I will say this step 1 foot past my gate, and I'll show you what happens when a woman's got nothing left to lose." For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the leader spat into the dirt. "We'll be back," he said. With men who don't ask, they rode off without another word. But Clara knew what came next. Fire, threats, maybe worse. She walked back inside, sat down, and reloaded the rifle with trembling fingers. In the cellar, Rosie was crying softly. Clara closed her eyes and whispered something she hadn't dared speak in 17 years. Not this time. That night, the wind howled down Dead Horse Ridge, like it knew what was coming. Clara sat by the hearth, her rifle across her knees, and a fire burning too low for comfort. She hadn't lit all the lamps. Darkness gave her thinking space. Rosie had cried herself to sleep again, her soft breathing muffled by the cellar door. Outside, the cold crept in through every crack and knot in the wood. But Clara didn't feel it. Not anymore. She stared at the flames, lost in them the same way she had stared at fire 17 years ago. She could still smell the smoke. Still see the orange glow crawling up the walls of her home. She remembered Emma's tiny hands reaching for her. Remembered the moment she knew the fire wasn't an accident. But no one had listened, until now. Now there was another child. Another home set to burn. Another powerful man pulling the strings from the shadows. And this time, Clara wasn't going to let the truth die in smoke and ash. She stood and walked out into the barn, the night biting at her face. There in the far corner, beneath a pile of old feed sacks and rusted tools, was the beam she hadn't touched in over a decade. The wood was warped, cracked with age, but she knew the hollow behind it still existed. She pried it loose with the end of her rifle. The notebook was still there, wrapped in oilcloth, hidden where no wind or flame could reach. Her husband's ledger. She opened it by lantern light, her fingers trembling as the familiar scrawl of Matthew Elwood returned to life beneath her hands. At the time of his death, Matthew had been working as a land appraiser, hired by the county to investigate irregularities in Pike's property acquisitions. Clara flipped through the pages, survey maps, measurements, but then names, dozens of names. Families Pike had loaned to and destroyed. Whole parcels taken by force. Settlers driven off with threats. Widows left with nothing. And worse, her eyes froze on one page. JP, arranged transfer of minor to third party, signed under duress. No paper trail. Clara blinked. A child. She read the rest. 1 year before the fire, Matthew had uncovered a system of forced adoptions, payment in kind Pike had called it, where debtors too poor to pay were coerced into surrendering their children, usually daughters, quietly handed off to men in other counties. Disappeared. It was why Matthew died, why their home burned. He had threatened to go public, to bring it to the sheriff. But he had waited just long enough to gather evidence. Too long. Clara sank to her knees in the hay. Her breath caught like a sob in her throat. Rosie's mother hadn't just been behind on rent. She had known. She had tried to fight back. That's why Pike's men had come before dawn. That's why they weren't just looking to collect. They were erasing. And now Rosie was next. Clara stood slowly. Her legs ached from kneeling. Her heart ached far deeper. She held the notebook tight to her chest and looked out the barn window toward a town. Dry Creek Hollow glowed faintly in the valley below lamplight from windows that had once belonged to friends who turned their backs. But she saw something else now. Not just betrayal, not just cowardice. Opportunity. Clara didn't have power. She didn't have allies. She didn't even have time. But she had something more dangerous. Truth. And truth, when lit right, could burn hotter than any fire. She returned to the cabin and opened the cellar. Rosie sat curled up, blinking in the sudden light. Clara knelt and showed her the notebook. "This belonged to my husband," she said. "He died trying to protect someone, like I'm going to protect you." Rosie looked up. "He was like you." Clara hesitated, then smiled softly. "He loved people who couldn't fight back. That's what made him dangerous." Rosie's voice cracked. "Are they coming again?" Clara nodded. "Most likely. But next time I won't be alone." The girl tilted her head. "It's just us." Clara reached for her rifle. "No," she said. "It's us and the truth." They came just before dusk. Clara had barely finished boiling the potatoes when she saw the dust rise at the edge of the ridge. 5 riders this time. Not the bluffing sort from earlier. These men came with purpose, cold, professional, and silent. A dog barked once in the distance, then went quiet. Rosie looked up from her bowl. "Is it them?" Clara nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Back door. Now." She shoved the trap door open, helped the girl inside again, but this time she placed the notebook in Rosie's arms. "Don't let anyone take this. Don't let anyone see it." Rosie clutched it to her chest. "What if they find me?" Clara's voice didn't shake. "They won't, and even if they do, they'll regret it." She sealed the door. Then she walked outside, rifle in hand, boots steady back straight. The years melted away. She wasn't the mad widow anymore. She was Clara Elwood, daughter of a blacksmith, widow of a murdered man, mother of a ghost, soldier, sharpshooter, witness, a woman with nothing left to burn. The riders spread out slowly in front of her porch. Their leader this time was younger, slick hair, gray, duster coat, gun low on his thigh. He didn't smile. "You made this harder than it had to be," he said flatly. Clara didn't blink. "You came to erase her." He shrugged. "Orders are orders. She's a child. She's a liability." Clara raised her rifle. "So am I." What followed was blur and thunder. The first shot hit one rider in the shoulder before he could draw. Clara pivoted left, fired again, miss. Someone shouted. A bullet tore through the porch post beside her face. She dropped to one knee, worked the lever, fired. Second rider dropped screaming. She moved like instinct, smooth, silent, precise. But there were too many. A rifle cracked behind her, glass shattered. The cabin window. Then came the fire. They tossed an oil lamp through the broken pane. Flames caught fast. She'd kept the place dry for too long. Kindling for comfort, now fuel for destruction. She barely had time to reload before a boot hit her side. Hard. She fell back, wine knocked out, rifle kicked away. They dragged her up by the collar. Someone punched her, blood filled her mouth. Another voice, "Get the girl." "No," Clara choked, trying to rise. Her knees buckled. One of them yanked open the cellar door. Rosie screamed. The man who pulled her out was older, weathered like sun-baked leather with dead eyes. He grabbed the child like a sack of potatoes. Clara clawed at the dirt. "Don't you touch her." But the man with the gray duster knelt beside her. "You could have stayed out of this. Now she'll be Pike's problem." Clara spat blood. "She's already yours." He stood. "Burn it all." Rosie cried Clara's name as they hauled her onto a horse. The others tossed lantern oil across the porch. The flames were spreading fast. The smell of charred memory filled the air. And then they were gone. The thunder of hooves vanished into the valley, carrying the only person Clara had let into her life since the day she lost everything. She lay there in the dirt alone, coughing smoke, her ears ringing. Around her, her home cracked and split. Flames licked the walls she had built with her bare hands. Her husband's chair collapsed in on itself. The roof groaned once, then caved. It should have broken her. 17 years ago it did, but not this time. Clara rolled to her feet, blood on her teeth, soot in her lungs, fire behind her. But ahead, retribution. She limped to the barn, to the last place they hadn't torched. She tore open the trunk she'd buried in hay years ago, the one labeled only Union Medical Supplies. Inside, a rusted revolver, a worn cavalry coat, a knife still sharp enough to cut a man's throat, and a map of Dry Creek Hollow. Clara looked up toward the horizon. They thought the fire had ended her, but fire only changes things. And this time, Clara Elwood was coming back, with nothing left to lose. Dry Creek Hollow hadn't seen Clara Elwood in 17 years. So when she rode into town at high noon, blood crusted on her temple smoke still clinging to her coat, rifle strapped across her back, people stopped what they were doing. Old men dropped cards mid-game. Women froze mid-laundry. Children stared wide-eyed from behind shutters. She passed the blacksmith, the church, the saloon. Every step of her mare's hooves echoed like thunder in the stillness. No one moved. Not until she stopped in front of Pike's estate, a towering white house built on stolen land, surrounded by clean suits and dirty secrets. On the front porch stood Judson Pike, flanked by 2 deputies, the mayor and Sheriff Calders, who hadn't lifted a hand to stop him in over a decade. But Clara wasn't here for mercy. She was here for truth. "You've got something of mine," Pike said with a calm that chilled the air. Clara dismounted slow and steady. "You mean the girl or the notebook?" Pike's eyes narrowed. "I mean your place in the dirt, woman." The sheriff stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Clara, let's be reasonable. This isn't the way. You let my husband burn for the truth," Clara snapped. "You let this man steal children under your badge. You watched all of you. For years." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back whispered, "Children." Clara pulled the ledger from her coat, held it high. "This book has names, places, transactions. My husband tried to expose Pike's trafficking ring. He died for it. And now Rosie, she's just the next." A sound behind the front door, a child's voice. Then Clara. Rosie burst out, barefoot guards scrambling after her. But she ran straight into Clara's arms. "She's okay," Clara whispered, clutching her. "You're okay." Pike's voice cut through. "You just made your last mistake." He drew, but Clara had already moved. The rifle swung up. Her body turned. A shot rang out, not hers. She gasped. Her shoulder jerked back, blood blooming across her coat. Rosie screamed. The crowd held its breath. Clara dropped to one knee but didn't fall. Her fingers steadied the barrel. She blinked once, twice, then fired. The shot hit Pike square in the chest. He stumbled, looked down, dropped to the floorboards like a sack of wheat. The mayor gasped. The sheriff stood stunned. For the first time in decades, the town wasn't afraid of Pike. They were afraid of what they'd become under him. Rosie knelt beside Clara. "Please don't die." Clara smiled, teeth red. "Not yet, honey. Got too much left to do." Sheriff Calders stepped forward slowly. "You got proof in that book." Clara held it out with shaking hands. "More than enough." He took it, opened the first page, read the first name, froze. Then, without a word, he turned to the townsfolk. "I think it's time we talked about what really happened to the Elwoods." Gasps. One woman wept. A man removed his hat. Clara let her head fall back, the sky bright above. The pain throbbed in her arm, but she was alive. And Rosie was free. Rosie helped her stand. The sheriff called for a doctor. The mayor called for a vote. And the townspeople began to whisper Clara's name, not as a curse, but as a prayer. Weeks passed. The wind still blew cold down Dead Horse Ridge, but the sound it carried had changed. Where once it howled with loneliness, now it rustled with laughter. Clara Elwood's cabin had burned, but the barn remained patched, painted, and for the first time in 17 years, filled with life. The townsfolk of Dry Creek came one by one, not with torches or gossip this time, but with timber nails, blankets, bread. Not out of guilt, out of recognition. They hadn't just watched a woman fall. They'd seen her rise, Rosie now slept in a bed beside the hearth, her hair brushed her hands, no longer trembling. She fed the chickens each morning and picked wildflowers for the grave Clara marked with 2 stones and a wooden cross. One for Matthew, one for Emma. Clara would sit nearby in the evenings, watching the sun slip behind the hills. Her arm still ached where the bullet tore through flesh, but the pain was honest. It reminded her she had lived through the fire twice, and this time come out carrying someone else. Sometimes Rosie would ask about Emma, about what she looked like, what songs Clara used to hum at bedtime. And Clara would smile not with sorrow, but with memory. She had a laugh like spring rain, she'd say, and eyes like yours, full of questions, full of light. The town held an inquiry. The sheriff read aloud the names in the ledger. Judson Pike's crimes no longer hid behind curtains. Some on the council resigned. Others were voted out. People began to ask better questions, not just how things had happened, but why they let it. One afternoon, as Rosie helped Clara plant wildflowers near the porch, she looked up and asked, "Do you think Emma would have liked me?" Clara knelt beside her, brushed the dirt from her cheek. "She would have loved you," she said. "Just like I do?" They stayed there in the quiet a while, just 2 souls stitched together by fire grief and second chances. And if the wind carried a softer tune down the mountain that evening, maybe it was because somewhere healing had begun. Maybe because sometimes saving someone else is how you save yourself. And maybe that's why stories like this still matter. So if this story touched something in you, stay with us a little longer. Subscribe. Because the fire never truly dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to light it again.